All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here will be doing our preview and prediction for the 2025 Michigan State Spartans. Look at this coaching staff. Everyone remains in place from last year. Jonathan Smith as the head coach. Brian Lindgren at offensive coordinator. Of course, those two are at Oregon State for a long time together. And then Joe Rossi, second year as the defensive coordinator. Of course, he had a lot of success with Minnesota. Respectable offseason, 57th ranked high school class, and they were able to pull in so far a top 25 portal class. 5-7 debut year. They lost 4 of the last 5 games. This was not that bad of a football team. They were quite competitive in most contests. Over the offensive side of the ball, Nick, we had a lot of high expectations for Aiden Childs, of course, because I think he's a pretty immensely talented quarterback. And they let him loose. And it was a lot of learning, a lot of mistakes, but also a lot of success for Aiden Childs. I thought the way the staff handled, kind of throwing him to the wolves very well. The true dual threat player, easy release. He can burn teams with his legs. Very effective in the option game. Showed the ability to throw on the run with effectiveness. His twitch and knee bend is very impressive as a runner. Nice feel for a collapsing pocket. Has a strong arm. Wasn't all that bad of his accuracy. Did have some balls sailing him, though. Forced things often early in the year, leading to bad turnovers. 7 of his 11 interceptions came across the first 4 games of the season. This guy is a good thrower off play action. Of course, in this scheme, you have a lot of play action from under center. Aiden Childs, Nick, I think this guy is going to continue to get better, and he's the quarterback you want. If you want to start winning, 9 to 11 games in this conference and competing for a playoff appearance, this is the ideal guy that's going to get you there, and I think he's going to continue to make leaps and bounds. I was very happy with how he played last year, despite the numbers not being overwhelmingly impressive.
Yeah, I think the numbers are a different story than what the film tells. I think the film was actually pretty impressive on Aiden Childs, who developed throughout last season and got better as the season went on. I think he's a player that still has a lot left to give for this Michigan State offense and will continue to develop as time goes on. I think he's a very talented young man who's coming into his own. About a 6% comp rate last year, not phenomenal. 2,400 yards passing, 13 touchdowns, 11 picks. You want to see that interception number certainly cut down. I think it's possible you can get that number to cut down this year. You'll find a way to get that number to cut down this year. He was also solid for them on the ground, 225 and 3 scores. They'll probably use his legs a little bit more this year. I'm curious to see what that looks like throughout the season. He's a very talented young man, right? This is a kid that continued to develop here. I think he's in the right system, still with John Smith as his head coach overall. I'm trusting his development here. The stats were not great for this offense last year. 110th in yards per game and rush yards per game, 123rd in the nation in points per game, scoring less than 20 points per game. But I'm expecting an increase from this offense. I think Aiden Childs will certainly step up, cut down on the turnovers, and be better this year.
Now you look at some of his weapons. This isn't exactly an overly impressive receiver group. I thought for a couple of years they had some pretty impressive depth, but they didn't really get great production out of them. You look at Nick Marsh. I expected him to emerge last year as the newcomer of the year in conference. He ended up as the leading pass catcher. Had good in-breaking routes, generates good space downfield, and even when he didn't, he would make tough contested catches, great yards after catch. As they got him involved in quick game often, he'd make people miss. This is a guy I ran week 1 in DraftKings Fantasy, Nick, because I thought he was going to be great, right? He had 1 catch, 11 yards. The next week, he goes off for 194 and 8 grabs, and of course, I don't have him in fantasy. I was just laughing, right? Because I knew this guy was going to do something early on for them, and throughout the year, he impressed. This is going to be a great player. The rest of the wide receiver group, they went out to the portal to fill it out. Rodney Bullard has only 1 career game under his belt from Valdosta State. Amari Kelly coming off a good season from Middle Tennessee, 6 foot 180, mainly played out wide. Evan Boyd caught 22 passes for nearly 300 yards for Central Michigan. Good size, though, at 6'3", 210. I thought the best add was likely Krishawn McCray. Undersized, 5'9", 165, brings twitch and speed, though. 2 600-yard seasons for Kent State. And Alante Brown, he's been in college football since 2020, but I've honestly given up on him doing anything. And then, of course, we have a tight end in Jack Velling, who was very impressive 2 years ago for Oregon State, has speed to win against the linebackers, nice long strider, runs good routes, nice willingness as a blocker, shows a nice wide base in that category, doesn't have great play strength, though, needs to get better in zone blocking. Only had 1 touchdown, which came in a 27-point blowout in the season finale. So they need to get him back to being a red zone threat. Nick, he had 8 touchdowns at Oregon State in 2023. I think if him and Mark can continue to elevate their game in this system, they might have a respectable passing attack. The rest of the group needs to find some footing, though.
They certainly need to get Jack Velling involved more. He's a really solid tight end. He was really good at Oregon State, and I think he still has a lot left in the tank to give. 411 yards receiving last year, 11 yards for grab, and 1 touchdown. Nick Marsh was really good last year. You rattled off his stats in your story about him, but I think he's a kid that's continuing to develop and will be a really key part of this offense going forward. 650 yards receiving for him, 15.8 yards for grab, 3 scores, about 60 yards per game. He'll have a great season. He can potentially be a 1,000-yard receiver by the time the season is said and done. I really like what he can do, a great leader for this team. They They went out to the portal. They added a bunch of different pieces here, which I think was smart, right? You started with Krayshawn McCray from Kent State, probably the best offensive piece on Kent State last year. Oh, it was a really bad team. 9 touchdowns for him, 17.6 yards per grab, and 700 yards receiving overall. 9 scores. Pretty good number there on 40 grabs. He'll be a big part of this offense. I think you'll probably play him in a various of different roles here. He'll be really good for this team. Amari Kelly, was a solid add from Middle Tennessee State. He had a decent year last year. Was previously at Auburn, had about 850 yards receiving and 4 scores. Good numbers there. I think Evan Boyd was not a terrible add from Central Michigan. He's still a guy that really didn't do a whole lot for them, but high upside potential there. Had 2 receiving touchdowns last year and 300 yards receiving. While Rodney Bullard from Valdosta State was not a bad player at that lower level. Hoping to see what he can do to make that jump up, although he's more of a depth piece here. I think Marsh's a great headliner here. I think McCray and Kelly are solid assets as well. Vealing is a good tight end overall. I think this passing attack is actually not bad. I like what they have at wide receiver here. I think it's an underrated little nice unit.
I imagine most viewers are Michigan State fans, but if you're not and you haven't seen Nick Marsh highlights, go check him out. He's really an impressive player. I think he's going to be really rising up the ranks in CFB. Look at this run game. This is a group, since Kenneth Walker departed, it's really just struggled, and I think it might only get worse. I thought they had a nice 1-2 punch last year on Lynch Adams and Nate Carter. They still were only able to put up 115 yards per game on the ground, and that includes Childs being thrown in there as a runner as well. So there's a lot of work to do when it comes to running the football, and of course, this is the bread and butter for Jonathan Smith. Oregon State, they had a nice physical pounding rushing attack. If they want to get back to that, they're going to have some of these guys need to step up. Elijah Tolliver from Sacramento State, 6'1", 204, ran for 900-plus yards last fall. Brandon Tullis and Mekhi Frazier both only had 7 carries each last year. Both are ex-3 stars from the state of Texas entering their second year. Incoming 3-star Jace Calarzo. He'll have a good chance to crack the rotation as well. The backfield's very inexperienced. I'm not high on this group. They will have a chance to prove themselves, so I think judgment overall for the running back room is to be determined, Nick, because it's pretty baseless because they have a transfer and a bunch of inexperienced guys, so they could be a lot better. So I'm just going to go with them being inexperienced with some nice high upside.
Inexperienced with high upside, I think is a good way to put it. I think it's a very inexperienced unit with some solid pieces. Tolliver was not a bad add from Sacramento State. He was decent for them last year. Brandon Tullis, I think, is not a bad younger player. He was probably be your key player to step up here. Mekhi Frazier's not bad either, and then the 3-star they added could be solid as well. A young, inexperienced unit, which I think is certainly an issue when you look at that, right? This unit does not have a whole lot of experience in a tough physical conference like the Big Ten. I think it's a bit of a problem early on. I think it's certainly going to show in the earlier part of the schedule, but maybe this running back unit can find a way to grow and develop throughout the season. Keep my eye on that unit.
Now we move to the offensive line for Michigan State. The team struggled up front. 114 sacks allowed, 114th in sacks allowed, that is. Stanton Ramil at left tackle was below average, but he's 6'7", 305, was battle-tested as a redshirt freshman. So, again, another one of those young tackles that's certainly going to improve. Kristen Phillips had a great week 1 versus FAU at right guard, but he went down with an injury and missed all season. 6'4", 320, he's going to kick over to left guard. Transfers occupy the rest of the O-line. Matt Golban, 6'4", 315. He was a great player up front for Wake Forest. I think he can play anywhere on the interior offensive line. Wake Forest, a bit of an underrated offensive line factory, Nick. A lot of good experience and good players transferring across the nation. Michigan State gets one here. And Golban, who should be the center. Luka Vincic spent 3 years at Oregon State. Should be getting a chance at right guard this fall as the starter. Ashton Lepo returns at right tackle. He was one of the worst in the conference in his position. He allowed 7 sacks. He's now going to be pushed by a Montana State transfer, Connor Moore, who was a standout starter this past year. He's been starting the past 2 seasons for them. Also picked up Caleb Carter from West Carolina. He wasn't that good, but played all 5 spots on the O-line for them in 2024. So great versatility brought to the table there. I think this group is going to showcase some nice improvement, Nick. I think Moore is going to slot in a right tackle. A nice veteran at center. Left guard seems to have some nice upside. And Ramil can only get better as being a young starting left tackle in the Big Ten. I'm pretty happy with what they have here.
I think this is a unit that's really solid here. I think the interior O-line is really solid overall. I think it's a unit that will get better as the season goes on. I like some of the players they have. I like what they added out of the portal here. I think Phillips is a really good guard who will certainly play good here. Matt Golban is a good add at center. I think he'll be really solid for this team. I think he was a decent add from Wake Forest. They produced a lot of key offensive line pieces, like you said. Connor Moore is a good right tackle as well, coming over from Montana State, making the jump from the FCS level to the FBS level. Maybe tough. Ashton Lepo, I think he'll find a way to get him involved as well on this offensive line. A good unit with solid depth.
Now we look at the offensive verdict for Michigan State. Smith is a great offensive coach and will eventually get this unit clicking, but it will take time. MSU will march forward this season as I think the Childs-Marsh duo is going to be deadly. This group needs more weapons to step up, and the Spartans are very limited in that department. The skilled depth isn't very good at the moment, or with proven production. The offensive line should be better as well, with great size and some vets now in the fold. Solid group they have here. 25 points per game is a realistic expectation I'm putting on them, giving them a B-.
I think this is a B- unit, certainly, right? This is a good unit overall, C+, B-. This is a unit that's got decent expectations. I think Childs is a good player. They'll get better as the season goes on. I think this underrated wide receiver room, I think it's actually not a bad unit based on what they added. The O-line is really solid as well. This offense should improve a little bit, right? It was a bad unit last year. I think they'll certainly score more than 20 points per game this year. Got to keep an eye on how much improvement they make. What is the jump going to look like year to year for this offense as Jonathan is trying to mold his team and develop a good key offense here?
Yeah, sorry, I gave it a C+ on my graphic. I teetered with the idea of a B-. I think it's certainly in that area, though. Moving to the defensive side of the ball, a group that did get a B- rating that only returns 4 starters. This wasn't that bad of a defense, I didn't think. They allowed only over 400 yards only twice, that being to Ohio State and Oregon, no slouch there. They were 110th in third down defense, though. Needed to improve in that area, but being that poor and still only giving up 332 yards per game is an interesting stat. I'm not really sure how you come to that. But we'll start with the defensive line. Jalen Thompson's their best player up front. Following his billing out of high school, it seemed likely he would emerge and was a great run defender last season. Production was limited, but he did make his presence felt. Quindarius Dunning has been productive in his career, not so much in 2024 following his transfer from Middle Tennessee, but a nice veteran that was good versus the run. David Santiago was pretty good for Air Force this past year. Should bring some of his discipline to the edge department. Anil Lafali from Wisconsin, they picked up as well. He didn't play in his freshman season, though. Interior offensive line, Alex Van Summeren. He's been in the program for years. Poor versus the run, but he was a strong tackler in the hole last fall. Ben Roberts at 6'2", 321 will see a larger role, but he hasn't just yet. Jalen Satchel was on the field for 200-plus snaps. He's been quiet with only five tackles. Grady Kelly didn't do much for Florida State last fall, but he was good for Colorado State in the 2 years prior as a run defender. I think at 6'2", 295. He will make an impact. Quality group, I think, here. Nothing special. Nothing's going to blow you away. But Joe Rossi worked a similar Minnesota and got results, Nick. Remember we talked about the Golden Gophers a couple of years in a row, where they weren't always poor when it came to sacks and tackles for loss, but they were always very strong against the run and in terms of discipline. So I think that's kind of the approach I'm taking with the Spartans' defensive front.
I think it's a fair approach to take, right? I think Thompson and Van Summeren are two key players that return that could be solid. Thompson, 17 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, a pass breakup. Expect big things from him. I think he'll make a huge step forward this year. Van Summeren as well was not bad for this team. 16 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks. Expecting him to take a big step forward and be involved on this defensive line. Grady Kelly, I think, was a decent add. He was previously at Colorado State, where he was really good at 6.5 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks there. Then he went to Florida State, where he did not have a great season last year. 19 tackles for loss, 2.5 tackles for 19 total tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss, that is, and 1 sack. Not a lot of good came out of that Florida State defense last year. David Santiago from Air Force is kind of interesting add. Maybe he'll be able to do something for this defensive line. Maybe they'll get him involved coming off the edge. He's a bit of a speedy player who didn't do a whole lot for Air Force last year. Curious to see how this defensive line improves. I think it's not a bad unit, though. I think the interior is certainly a little bit weak, but I trust the coaching here. I think they'll be solid come the end of the season.
Like in the middle of this defense for years. This was a nice deep group at linebacker. A lot of those players have graduated, though. Wayne Matthews appears next up. He was a star for Old Dominion, played very well in his near 250 snaps last fall for the Spartans. He's been really a good run defender, efficient tackler in his career. Jordan Hall hasn't yet emerged like I thought he would, but he'll be forced to grow up this fall, as he should be penciled in as a starter. Darius Snow, he was a pretty good slot for them back in 2021. He's battled repeated injuries since, which has really limited his on-field action. Did 5 snaps at linebacker last year. Good run defender, had no missed tackles. I think it's a formidable trio there if Snow can stay on the field for once. Asaya Moa from BYU comes over as a transfer, and they return all 3 backups from last year. So this is a good group here. I think they have nice, well-established depth, Nick, and linebacker continues to be an underrated strength for this football team.
I think it's underrated strength, certainly. I think Wayne Matthews is a really good player who will take another big step forward this year. 33 total tackles and a fumble recovery for him last year. Darius Snow was not bad at all. 29 total tackles, 1 tackle for loss for him, while Jordan Hall had 24 total tackles, a tackle for loss, and 2 pass breakups. I think those are 3 key players there. I like what they have here. Not bad at all. A good linebacking unit that's a solid core overall.
They move to the secondary. Revamped corner room. There's only 3 guys who really got snaps last year, are all gone. Chance Rucker saw 2 games last year due to injury, but played lots of snaps in 2023. He's below average and struggled altogether, though. Joshua Eaton enters his 6th year of college football. Was a sound corner for Texas State these past few years. Malcolm Bell should be big for them. Spent the last 3 seasons at UConn. He's been a really good run defender. Coming off his best season in coverage, I expect him to play a big role this fall. Najee Burt was an elite cover man for Eastern Illinois. He's actually matched up last year on Pat Bryant versus Illinois and held him in check. That's the only kind of example we have of anything he did against this type of competition. Eddie Willie got on the field for the Spartans, but was no good. I think the safety group is in good standing. They returned both starters, Nakai Martinez and Malik Spencer. Martinez being much better all around. It was third on the team in tackles. Armorion Smith and Justin Denson both that got on the field a little bit last year and will back them up. Jeremiah Hughes and Andrew Brinson will contend for that starting slot role, but neither have much playing time to their name. Solid secondary here. I really like Rossi's ability to get these guys in sync. I think there's some nice upside at corner. Quality group top to bottom, Nick. Again, nothing that's probably going to blow you away. A lot of transfers, a lot of inexperience, but again, I'm putting trust in the coaching for them not to be awful.
A decent secondary, certainly. I think Martinez is a really solid player to get back. He was really good for this team last year. 51 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 2 picks, 2 pass breakups, solid there. Malik Spencer was good in coverage as well. 44 total tackles, a tackle for loss, a pick, and 2 pass breakups. Not bad numbers at all. I think they added Trance Rucker comes back. Obviously he got hurt last year, but I think he'll be solid. The 2 adds I think were interesting were Joshua Eaton and Malcolm Bell. I'll talk about Eaton first. I think Eaton's a solid player, 27 total tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss, a QB hurry, and 5 pass breakups. He was not bad at Texas State, a guy that's been around the game for a little bit here, bounced around, not bad. And then Malcolm Bell, the Canadian man from Montreal, was solid at UConn last year at times, 26 total tackles, a tackle for loss, 3 pass breakups, also had 4 pass breakups and 28 total tackles in 2023 at UConn. A good ad, certainly going to be interested to see if he can make the jump up forward there, but I think Bell is high upside, a solid portal ad in my opinion.
Now I move to defensive verdict. I think that they played really good last year on the side of the ball, but they failed to stand out in any one key area. And outside of Thompson, don't really have any young guys you can point to as bona fide studs. I like the linebacking group and some of the portal ads at corner, but it's really hard to get excited about this defense. I still think they march forward at the end of the day, as Rossi's a great coach and they seem to have some physicality to them. So I went ahead and gave them a B-.
I think they improved, certainly, right? I think the improvement is going to happen at some point, but that yards per game, was solid at times, as was the points per game. Points per game, maybe you want to hope a little bit better there overall. I think this is a unit that will get better throughout the season. It's certainly a weaker unit in the conference still, and that's why this team is probably not going to be very good overall. A weaker offense and a weaker defense, but the defense is showing some progress. I'm trusting the coaching here to develop this unit a little bit more. We'll see what they look like throughout the season, but I think they're in line for some improvement.
Now you look at the prediction for Michigan State. I looked at the schedule and I went 5.5 has got to be the win total, right? Because you can clearly see the games they're going to be dogs in. That's exactly what it is, Nick. 5.5. The books are testing you to try and get the right side if they're going to pull an upset or not. If they want to make a bowl game, they're going to have to step up against a much higher degree opponent. Aiden Childs and the offense will improve, and I think the defense also moves ahead at least by an inch further, and they're going to have a great opportunity to interject some excitement into this program of marquee games in the back half of the year. This will be a respectable team, but the final record probably won't show it. Clear theme here, Nick. They went and got Joe Rossi from Minnesota. I mean, that was a very similar type of program, right, from the Big Ten, in terms of scheme. They want to, do more with less. That's what they did at Minnesota. It's a very similar offensive scheme as well. We want to try and run the football and outmatch you with physicality. Probably won't do much through the air, but I think Michigan State certainly has a better offense than Minnesota might. You understand the theme I'm talking about here, Nick. 5-7 for both of us. They have to step up and beat somebody. It's got to be Penn State or Michigan most likely. Those are your home games. I don't see it at the moment, but I don't think this will be a bad team at all. They're not going to be a pushover.
No, they're not going to be a pushover, right? I was looking at the schedule and I kept telling myself, where do I get 6 wins? Where do I get 6 wins? I want to get 6 wins here somewhere. I just couldn't be able to find it finally. Maybe, I guess, Michigan's probably your best shot at getting 6 wins if that offense does not live up to expectations that Bryce Underwood has on him. I don't think they're winning any of those other road games on the schedule. Minnesota, maybe you find a way to win that game. I don't know. Certainly a tough one. This is a team that's very intriguing to me. I do want to highlight that first week game against Western Michigan. I don't think they're going to lose that game, but they're in a similar spot they were last year. The line right now, according to FanDuel in New York, is minus 18.5 favorites. Michigan State's are. Last year they were 13-point favorites against Florida Atlantic and only won that game by 6. So if you're looking for an interesting betting line potentially for week 1, maybe Western Michigan plus 18.5 is something you want to take a stab at, because the Spartans team seems to start slow a little bit. Just an interesting thing I noticed while looking at the schedule. I think they'll be able to beat Boston College at home. I'm not super high on the Eagles this year. I think this is an opportunity for them to get a nice big win in an out-of-conference game. The conference schedule schedule's tough. I think it's intriguing. They play Maryland at Ford Field. You and I were just talking about this. I quite like that. The kids are home from school. They're not on campus, so might as well play in Detroit, closer to where a lot of your fan base probably settles there. Bring in some fans on the holiday weekend. Not a terrible idea at all. Plus, the Lions always play on Thursday anyway, so the field's available for the weekend, so it's never really a scheduling conflict. The Lions are going to play on Thanksgiving like they always do for the past, 50, 60 years, however long it's been. A great tradition that goes on in Detroit overall. Tough schedule, certainly, but I think there's progress showing here. I think John Smith is a really good coach. I like what he's done so far. It took a while for him to get things going at Oregon State. They went 2-10, 5-7, and 2-5 in his first 3 years before finally getting to that 7-win plateau in 2021 before winning 10 games in 2022. I think he'll finally get this turned around. I think he'll find a way to get this team wins in the future. I think Aiden Childs is still developing into a great quarterback in the future. A harsh 5-7. I am rooting for this team. I just can't see him getting to 6 wins, unfortunately, but I do hope for the best for them in the future. I think they'll find a way to be better in 2026, 2027.
And I think our prediction for 26 will be pretty high on them. And of course, Nicky brought up the FAU game. I had MSU covering in that game. I had a big bet on them, and they went into making a 2-score game in the fourth quarter, and Aiden Childs threw an interception at the goal line, and they ended up not covering that game. So a bit of a sore spot there, but this will be a good team. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.